Hi, this is Commissioner Raquel Regalado. Welcome to Influential People in District 7. And today we have someone and a topic that is near and dear to my heart. For those of you that know me, you know that I have two children in the spectrum. And one of the things we've been talking about at the county is employment of neurodiverse individuals. And Vanessa Vila is doing just that. So thank you for being with us, Vanessa.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we have a lot of questions, but we'll start
Sure.
with your business.
Okay.
So if you could tell us a little bit about our grounds.
Okay, so I started Our Grounds in 2019 with the mission of training and employing young adults with all abilities, as I like to say. We did form it as a nonprofit. We call it Coffee with a Cause. Thankfully, we've been doing really well. We had a little hiccup there with the pandemic, but right now on staff we have 5 young adults working, and they're all doing wonderful, and we are able to fulfill our mission.
That's amazing. So when we talk about people that are doing this work, there always is like a reason, like what brought you to this? What about your background said, I'm going to start a business and employ people of all abilities? That's what I'm going to focus on. Clearly you like coffee.
I do like coffee. That's second. That's second.
Right. So what led you to coming up with this idea?
I've always had a strong passion for helping others in need. I never knew how that was going to pan out, and it kind of took this route. My mom was a teacher, so as a child I would help her in the classroom, and always was paired with a young kid with special needs, because that is the kid that needed the most support.
Right.
And there was kind of how my passion commenced. So I started off as a teacher. I worked at a private school, and then I became an occupational therapist. From there, I just working in the field in Miami, I realized that there was not much opportunity.
There's a cliff.
Yeah.
Right
There's
after.
A cliff. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Exactly.
There's a cliff. And then we talk about that cliff with parents and teachers, and therapists, and I did this work at the school board, right? When you first start doing this work, you're like, oh, the little ones, like leap, let's start, let's
give them a
going.
Jump start.
Give them a jump start. Then you do like the classroom, and then you get into like the inclusion, non-inclusion, like what works for this child, and then some of the vocational training. And then all of a sudden, like 22,
that's it.
And the world like literally ends.
Yeah.
And we talked to folks about that cliff. With your experience as a therapist, how did you deal with the adults that you were working with when they got to that point?
So it's like an aha moment for me. I was a teacher, and then I was an occupational therapist. I moved to Washington, D.C., and I moved back to Miami. When I moved back to Miami, I reconnected with the parents just to check on the young kids that I had worked with since I was a young kid.
Right.
And then most of the feedback was, oh, they're just home, or they help me at my job, or I haven't been able to find anything for them to do, or they have a little extracurricular, but that's about it. That's all that I can find for them. I'm trying to get them into Publix, things like that. So then that was where I kind of shifted my perspective on, oh boy, like I've been targeting all my career on the young ones and in the school system.
Because we were always thinking we were preparing them for something.
Mm-hmm.
And then the issue is once they graduate, and I tell people that, and I know as a teacher, you probably saw this, one of the great things about the school district are graduations. And graduations are normally happy events.
Definitely.
Except for children with disabilities. Those kids don't want to graduate because there's nothing that comes after. And it's heartbreaking when you go through that process
You're
with them, because their parents are like, what happens tomorrow?
Correct.
What happens? What do we do now? We've been preparing for what?
You're absolutely right. And that's hopefully the need that I'm fulfilling. Unfortunately, it's a coffee shop that we have. So there's a small coffee shop in Kendall.
How did you come up with the idea of a coffee shop?
I have to give that credit to my husband. My husband owns a pizza restaurant right next to the coffee shop. So he's the one that studied the hospitality industry through and through. He's worked in the restaurant business his whole life. And then when he opened Local Pie, the pizza place, there was a space next door. That's when my idea started generating. Okay, I can do something in this space. What should I do? What does the neighborhood need? What's an easy, cool environment that would be great for what I want to do? And that's when I generated the idea for the coffee shop. So coffee, I like the idea of coffee because everyone loves coffee, but also it creates a nice, nurturing environment for the young adults that are working. It's not a fast pace. People are usually there to chill, and
Yeah,
It's
different than a restaurant.
Correct.
You know, so your husband runs a restaurant, and again, you know, we have some culinary training, and they usually have an interest in some of that, but putting them in a restaurant, you know, it's kind of like you watch like Hell's Kitchen, and then you're like, no,
it's challenging.
That is not okay.
I work it, and I can tell you, as an occupational therapist, getting thrown in a pizza restaurant to help out with shifts, it's challenging.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. There's
yes.
a lot. There's sensory overload, even for those of us that are neuronormal.
110%. I tell my husband to lower the volume all the time of the radio. I'm like, I can't hear the customers. Please do something. So definitely, that's why I liked the idea of a coffee shop. You go in there. I mean, the music is mellow. The vibe is mellow. Most of the people that go in the coffee shop go knowing the concept of our coffee shop. Some don't, and that's just fine as well. Everyone hopefully leaves with a positive experience after coming to visit us.
Right. So you decided to start the coffee shop. Like, how do you even begin? You're an occupational therapist, so obviously you did the training.
I did.
Right. So you're doing the part because the part that's difficult, you know, for a lot of folks is I'll employ these people, but how do I train them?
Right.
So you came already kind of backwards. You were like, I'm going to start a business. I know how to train them.
Now I don't know how to make coffee.
No, but I'm going to pick a business that works for them. Right. So you actually started the other way around and then figured out like, okay, now I have to run a business.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. I was the occupational therapist. So I went in with my therapist mindset, curriculums, progress reports, progress notes, checklists, everything.
Visual schedule.
Correct.
Yes.
So that on my end was very easy because that's what comes naturally to me. The hard part for me was running the business, which I learned something still new every single day. But yes, that becomes a challenge if you are not trained. Some people, that might be what stops them from hiring someone. Yeah. The stigma associated to the word disability in itself is like, okay, well, I don't know what to do. A lot of times
people hear disabilities, Vanessa, and they think accommodations, right? And I think accommodations and ADA is the part that scares people because they're like, well, what are those accommodations? And usually you think about physical accommodations or time. And they don't understand that actually employing like a neurodivergent person, you know, or, you know, they have abilities, they have disabilities, but they have abilities. Correct. And in many cases, they're great workers. They have a great,
best.
You know,
I personally think
my daughter has like a Puritan work ethic.
Yes.
You know, like a Puritan ethic.
The best, the most motivated, the most diligent.
Happy to be there.
Yes.
Happy to be there. They're early. Yes. You know, you got to like tell them to go. It's time to go, you know,
clock out. Come on.
What does it do for their self-esteem? Because that's one part, you know, because there's another piece of this. And I wanted to ask you about the parents, you know, because a lot of parents are now getting their head around employment. But one of the problems that we have in this community is that the parents baby them. The parents are scared. The parents are not sure. You know, they know that they're adults. They want to work. They want to be adults. And sometimes the parents are the ones that are like,
I agree.
Are we there yet?
So some of the young staff that I've had, we've had conversations like, oh, my mom. And I'm like, okay, well, give her time, show her you're responsible. But yes, it's a lot of times the parents that are just not ready to take that leap of faith for the next step in their child's life.
But what does it do for their self-esteem? Because one thing that we found is that when they don't work, when they hit that cliff and they have nothing to do. And by the way, you know, for the folks that are watching, you know, there's a lot of empirical evidence on this. You know, they become depressed, they become violent. I always tell people, if you lock me up for 5 years, I'm going to become violent. Like that's just the nature of, I think, what happens to any human being.
Everyone complains about work, but work gives you a sense of purpose.
Right.
Gives you
a sense of identity.
Correct.
Right. And it gives you goals and it gives you something to actually look forward to.
Right.
You know, so for them, working is such a large part of being an adult. So how does that play out at the coffee shop?
I've seen these young adults. Some of the young adults have been with me since the very beginning. So they've been working now for 3 years and their confidence level is just like skyrocketed, which is amazing. Like the regulars know their name. If they're not in, like, I haven't seen so-and-so in a while. Like, how are they doing? They're just doing great because of that. I mean, their confidence level, whereas before I had tried to get 5 jobs and everyone told me no, now I got a job. Not only do I have a job, but I'm successful at my job. Right. So there you see the difference. So thankfully, that has been a great experience for me to watch from the outside looking in for the parents, but also for the young adults that have gained meaningful employment.
So in terms of your customers, I think, one of the things that your store does is it also gives people the ability to see adults with disabilities at work, right? And that, now we got to deal with the stigma, right? Because the stigma, I think, is our biggest problem. We spend so much time talking about diagnosis and therapy, and we don't talk about the stigma. And there's so many stigmas, right?
Mhm.
And I know people with like ADD, for example, and ADHD who didn't admit that until they were like in their 50s because they didn't want people to think
Right.
that they were flaky.
And it still happens.
It still happens. People with epilepsy who don't tell people that they have epilepsy because they don't want you to think that somehow, that means that they're unreliable. People in the spectrum who believe that if they tell you that they're in the spectrum, you're going to immediately be like, oh, wait a second.
Right.
What happens next? How do you deal with that? And how do you talk to your employees and customers?
I've seen the thing that I didn't realize was going to happen most was that our customers, we're showing them an example of inclusion in the workforce and kindness and inclusion overall in society. When I started with the mindset, I'm going to employ young adults with all capabilities. And that was where my focus was at. Now,
was you didn't buy the stigma. You didn't know that was an issue.
Well, yeah, I didn't even think of it. I didn't even think of it. Now, looking back, I think the biggest impact we've had is on our customers, not actually our employees. The customers are friends with our employees. The customers follow them on Instagrams. The customers have conversations with our employee. So my goal now has kind of shifted. Yes, of course, I want to employ young adults with all abilities, but I also want to continue the example and hopefully promote inclusion for other people in our community to follow our lead.
Right. And a lot of parents, actually parents have told me about your store. Some of them, they have children in the spectrum or they have children with disabilities, and they go there not only to get a cup of coffee, but also because it allows them to see into a different future, which is huge. Because that perspective for parents is so important. Because one of the things
as I'm not a parent, so I don't know, but I've had parents come and they're just sitting at the coffee shop crying, and I don't know what to say, but they're just inspired, right? Like,
well, because
I've been told so long my child has this limitation, this limitation, this limitation, but I've never been told my child could do X, Y, and Z.
Right. Because when you get the diagnosis, one of the things that happens is that you mourn the child that you thought you were going to have. Right. And that's like the first stage of it. And that's why we talk about all the different stages of grief that parents go through and why some of them get stuck like in denial. And then as your child gets older, I always tell people you need someone 5 years out, 10 years out, 15 years out, but to actually see adults employed, that's like a whole new reality, right? That's like you put away all those things that you were worried about and you see a life where they can be independent, where they can have a job, where they can be happy, where they can have
Correct.
These relationships with strangers and have these interactions and have those interactions, be positive. So thank you for that, because I think that really is, one of the things that we need to focus on to give parents hope. And then also to educate people, on inclusion, because everybody talks about, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and adults with disabilities are completely left out of that conversation. We focus on gender and we focus on race, and nobody talks about disabilities.
I agree.
So that's amazing. All right. So now you've had the coffee shop, for 3 years. Biggest lesson learned?
Oh, do you have 5 more hours? I don't even know where to start. I promise I learn something new every single day. Every single day.
Yeah.
When it comes to business, when it comes to teaching young adults, when it comes to managing, when it comes to the customer base, I learn something new every day.
Well, you mentioned that you survived the pandemic. So,
yes.
I mean, like you opened and then boom, we had a pandemic.
Exactly.
So how did you survive that?
I think that surviving the pandemic, I mean, was hard for everyone, right? Worldwide. But it shifted a lot of people's mindset in the support local mentality.
Yeah.
At least I saw that a lot in South Florida. So whereas before people would go to Starbucks, now on their mind was, let me support my local coffee shop because I want them to stick around. I know Starbucks is going to stick around.
Right.
So I think it shifted a lot of people's mindsets when it comes to the pandemic. Okay, I need to support local, and we're more local. We don't get any more local. So I think that ended up helping us out a little bit. Of course, there was a huge drop right in the beginning when everybody was unsure of what was happening. But after that, we were able to continue to work. We never closed. I kept on going. And I always,
well, I don't know what was your experience, but my experience during the pandemic was that adults with disabilities followed the rules better than anyone else.
yes.
Which was unexpected because we thought at the beginning, like, this is going to be
Right.
so difficult to explain to them.
Right.
But like, I had to tell my daughter to take off her mask.
Yeah,
She
so
would be like
I'm-
in her room with her mask. And I'm like, it's okay. We're inside now.
So I had to shift a little the way that I did things a little bit because, again, I wanted to create a safe space. That's always been my number one priority. So when the pandemic started, we didn't know what was going on. So I gave the parents the option, okay, they don't have to work in here. They can work maybe 1 or 2 hours from home so they stamp like coffee sleeves, they write messages, like positive messages on the pastry bags, things like that. So I would send packages home, but I still left the coffee shop open. So I was working morning, day, every day.
Right.
Being able to keep the doors open. Then little by little, when we knew more of what was going on, then our staff started trickling back in, which was a huge help for me that
Right.
had been open the whole time.
Right. And they wanted to go back.
Oh, of course. They were texting me all the time. Like, I want to go back. I want to go back.
My
When can
daughter
I
was
go
like
back?
climbing up the wall.
I'm like, you can come back whenever. Ask your mom, like, when can you go back? Like, that's not my call.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, now, post pandemic, you mentioned you have 5 employees. You've been open 3 years. What's the plan now?
My hope is to continue to inspire others and also to create like a more of a vocational training program, just because right now we're a small coffee shop and I have not millions, but hundreds of inquiries. I need placement opportunity for my child. I don't care if they get paid. I just want them to do something meaningful. Please, please, please. And there's so much that I can do.
And you figured out the hard part. You figured out how to train them,
Mhm.
and how to keep them working and how to keep them motivated, and how to engage them and find them different things to do. So I think, scaling that, right? And finding a place for that
Right.
is the next logical step, because most people, like I said, they can't figure that. That's the
Right.
hardest part for most people,
Right.
which was the part that you focused on from the beginning.
Right.
All right. So now you got to tell us where the coffee shop is and what your recommendation is.
Oh, everything is good. But we serve.
Says the owner.
Yes, it is true.
Always.
Small
Right.
menu. So we make sure everything is executed nicely. We do coffee and then some breakfast items, some lunch items, and then pastries.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And location?
It's, do you want me to tell you the address?
Yes,
Or
the
just
address, yeah.
107 14 Southwest 113th Place.
Cool. And social media? Can they follow you somewhere?
It's at Our Grounds Coffee.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Vanessa. Thank you for the amazing work you're doing. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Vanessa Villa, Our Grounds. If you haven't gone, get up, go. It's amazing. You're going to be inspired by the coffee and by the employees. Thank you so much.